How are you?
You mentioned about Brother Ahmed's Brother Ahmed, is he the Burmese?
Yeah.
Oh, so Idris Mayat's brother-in-law.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have any contact information?
I have his number.
Later on.
Yeah, I'll give his number.
Sure.
Definitely. All right. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidil Anbiya'i wal Mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin amma ba'd. All thanks and praise are due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and may His peace and blessings be upon His last and final messenger, His family, His companions, and those who follow them until the end of times. Alhamdulillah, last week we were able to cover verses 31 through 41. And inshallah tonight we're going to explore the meanings of verses 42 till 50. Now in the last passage of the surah that we discussed last week, the surah briefly discussed the story of Hud alayhi salam, who was sent to the people of Ad. And the people of Ad were a very powerful, a very wealthy, a very strong nation physically. And the story of Hud alayhi salam, just like the story of Nuh that came before it, it's a story about patience. It's a story about sabr. That the Prophet had to have patience when dealing with his community, when dealing with his people. It's a story about steadfastness, about istiqamah, that the Prophet and his community had to remain steadfast and firm upon their faith. It's also a story about resilience, and it's a story about reliance, tawakkul upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we all know that Hud alayhi salam, he called his community, his own people, to the worship of Allah alone without any partners. But instead of listening to him and accepting his call, they opposed him, they mocked him, they ridiculed him, and they chose to disbelieve. And as a result of their choice, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent them an extremely severe punishment. So just as this is a story of patience and perseverance and steadfastness and resilience, it's also a severe warning to any disbelievers. It's a severe warning against pride, against arrogance and disbelief. So it's a severe warning against any individual, community or nation that opposes and rejects the truth. That any community or nation or country that listens to this story or that hears about this story is supposed to take a lesson. They're supposed to understand that just as this powerful nation was destroyed, we too can also be destroyed. So they were completely wiped off the face of this earth because of their disbelief. And they say that the story, it also demonstrates the absolute power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the absolute power and authority to do anything that He wills. Now the surah, it moves on and it mentions the generations and communities that came after the time of Hud alayhi salam. So this is going to include the people of all the prophets that came after him. So it includes the people of Salih, the people of Lut, the people of Ibrahim, the people of Shu'aib, alayhimus salam, and others as well. And Allah mentions this in a very quick and summarized fashion. So we're going to notice that in the surah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to deal with these stories in detail. Rather, He's simply going to allude to them. He's going to make a very brief reference to all of these stories. And the surah keeps with this same theme, that whenever a prophet or messenger is sent to a people, the initial reaction of their people is to oppose and reject them. And that has been the habit or the nature of humanity since the beginning of time. That every single time a prophet or messenger was sent to a nation, the initial reaction was always opposition. It was to always question, to oppose, and to also mock and ridicule and make fun of the prophet and the believers. And this has been the reaction of several communities throughout history, including the community of the Prophet ﷺ. That when the Prophet ﷺ first came out and started inviting people to Islam, the initial reaction of his people, his own uncle, was, "Is this the reason why you have called us here? That what in the world are you talking about?" It was always objection and ridicule. So the Prophet ﷺ, he's being reminded and consoled that his brothers from amongst the prophets and messengers had to go through and experience the exact same hardships and difficulties. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, ثُمَّ أَنشَأْنَا مِن بَعْدِهِمْ قُرُونًا آخَرِينَ ثُمَّ أَنشَأْنَا مِن بَعْدِهِمْ قُرُونًا آخَرِينَ. Then after them we brought into being other generations. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that after having destroyed the people of Ad, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought forth a number of different communities and nations. He brought into being other generations. So ansha'na, it comes from the Arabic verb ansha'a yunshi'u, which literally means to bring forth, to create, to bring something into existence. And the word qurun, it's the plural of the word qarn. And usually the word qarn, it means a generation. Like it's referring to a time frame. So in this context, it's referring to the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought forth many communities, many nations after the people of Ad. So for example, we have the people of Salih, the people of Lut, the people of Shu'aib, the people of Ayyub, the people of
It's very low.
the people of Yusuf alayhi salam, and others than them as well. And oftentimes these past generations are mentioned to remind us of the temporary nature of this world and as reminders of Allah's ability to destroy those who refuse to accept the faith. So they say one of the main lessons, one of the reasons why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions all of these past nations is because it reminds us that our time is limited. That every single generation, every single community of people, they're just given this appointed time to live in this world. And oftentimes what happens is people, they become deluded, they become deceived by the life of this world. They say the greatest deception, the single greatest deception for humanity is the thought that they're going to live forever, that they have time, that time is abundant, and that they have this opportunity to live here and enjoy life, and that nothing else will happen, that nothing else exists. So by showing us that look, all these generations existed in the past, and they came and they're gone. The same thing will happen to us as well. That here, we're here today, we're living in this time period, but a time's going to come when we're going to be gone as well. Our children will be here, they'll live for their time period, and they will be gone as well. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding us of the temporary nature of the life of this world. And as another reminder is, of course, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the ability and power to punish and destroy the non-believers. So each of these communities or nations has its own limited time in the life of this world. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that in the next verse. That مَا تَسْبِقُ مِنْ أُمَّةٍ أَجَلَهَا وَمَا يَسْتَأْخِرُونَ. No community can hasten its term nor delay it. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not given us as human beings control over our time. We are not the ones who determine how long we're going to live. We are not the ones who determine when we're going to leave this world, or even how we're going to leave this world. That is all up to the will, the decree, the divine decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So no human being can hasten or delay the will and command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If Allah wills for a community to be punished or destroyed at some specific time, it cannot be hastened or delayed. And it won't happen earlier or later. It will happen at the exact time determined and decreed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this verse gives us an understanding of how helpless human beings are in front of the might and power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So again, oftentimes we are deluded, we are deceived by our own capabilities. And this is common throughout history. It's a common trait of humanity. That we as human beings think that we are in ultimate control. That we have access to material things. We have access to material resources. And we have access to a lot of, technology and science and wealth and power. And that we are in control of our affairs. But the reality is, we have no control over anything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone is the one who controls every single thing that takes place in this world. Right? تَبَارَكَ الَّذِي بِيَدِهِ الْمُلْكِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who alone is the sovereign, the owner, the master of every single thing that happens in this world. So by telling us this and reminding us about this, we're being reminded of our own incapabilities, of our own limits, that we as human beings are not in control of our own time. So this verse gives us an understanding again of how helpless we are. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent prophets, messengers, warnings and reminders to each of these communities and nations. So in this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that look, your time period is limited. The amount of life, your lifespan is limited, but your lifespan is enough that if you want, you can achieve salvation. Every single human being is given equal opportunity to earn eternal salvation, to free their souls from condemnation the hereafter, to free themselves from punishment, and to earn ultimate and everlasting reward. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then tells us, ثُمَّ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلَنَا تَتْرَى كُلَّمَا جَاءَ أُمَّةً رَسُولُهَا كَذَّبُوا فَأَتْبَعْنَا بَعْضَهُم بَعْضًا وَجَعَلْنَاهُمْ أَحَادِيثَ فَبُعْدًا لِقَوْمٍ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. Ajib. Then we sent our messengers in succession. ثُمَّ أَرْسَلْنَا رُسُلَنَا تَتْرَى. That after the time of Hud alayhi salam, we sent messenger after messenger after messenger. We sent prophet after prophet after prophet to remind humanity about the reality of the life of this world, to remind humanity about the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to remind humanity about life after death, to remind humanity about what the truth is. And whenever there came unto a community a messenger, they would deny him. So we caused them to follow one another, and we made them objects of stories, so away with the people who don't believe. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that He sent messengers to each nation, one after the other in succession, to invite them towards tawheed, faith and belief. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us the exact same thing in Surah An-Nahl, where He tells us, وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا, that indeed we sent a messenger unto every community. And they said, أَنِعْبُدُ اللَّهِ وَاجْتَنِبُ الطَّاغُوتِ, worship Allah and shun false deities. So every nation was sent a messenger. Every nation was sent a warner. And the message of these messengers and warners was the exact same thing. That worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone without any partners, and shun these false deities, these false gods, these false ideas. Then Allah tells us, فَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ هَدَى اللَّهِ وَمِنْهُمْ مَنْ حَقَّتْ عَلَيْهِ الضَّلَالَةِ. And then amongst those people, amongst that nation, there were some who were given guidance. There were some who accepted the message, and then there were others who chose to disbelieve, who chose to be led astray. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says, so travel upon the earth, and behold how the deniers fared in the end. So every time a messenger was sent to a people, they faced the same rejection and denial. Right? What Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, كُلَّمَا جَاءَ أُمَّةً رَسُولُهَا كَذَّبُوهُ. Every time a messenger came to a nation, they rejected him and they denied him. And they would oppose him, call him a liar, and refuse to believe in his message. So we saw that with the story of Nuh alayhi salam. We saw that with Hud. You're going to see the same thing with Salih, with Shu'aib, with Lut, with Ibrahim, and with Musa alayhi salam, and with our Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Every time they came to the nation, كَذَّبُوا. They rejected him, they belied him, they called him a liar. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punished each of them. And that's what's meant by, so we caused them to follow one another. فَأَتْبَعْنَا بَعْضَهُمْ بَعْضًا. We caused each of these nations to be followed by one another in terms of being destroyed and being punished. And since each of these nations was punished, they became objects of stories. وَجَعَلْنَاهُمْ أَحَادِيث. We made them into stories, things that are discussed, things that are used as lessons and morals for people that come after them. So meaning they were spoken about and discussed from one generation to the next. Anyone who wants to learn a lesson from the story has the opportunity to do so. And this gives us a sense of how important history truly is. وَجَعَلْنَاهُمْ أَحَادِيث. So the commentators, they break here and they say, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us about the importance and significance of learning about our own history, but in general about learning about human history. So history repeats itself, and the best way to avoid mistakes of the past is by learning about them and trying to prevent the same mistakes from taking place again. And that's why as Muslims, we have the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ. Almost every single aspect of his life has been preserved for us. We know about his life even before his birth. We know about his childhood, his infancy. We know about how he was when he was a young adult. We know exactly what happened when he received revelation. And the entire Meccan period, the entire 12, 13 years in Mecca, we know what happened. Then the entire 10 years in Medina, we know exactly what happened. And we can model what we do after the life of the Prophet ﷺ. That's why it's important for us as believers, as Muslims, as conscious believers, to not only learn the seerah, but to actually study it, to analyze it, to take a very deep look into it, and extract these lessons. that how did the Prophet ﷺ respond to certain situations? How did his companions respond to certain situations? How can we follow and emulate their success? How is it that the Prophet ﷺ, in a period of 23 years, transformed the entire society? He transformed the entire Arabian Peninsula. A society that was literally drowning in darkness and immorality and sin and vice and anything evil that you can think of. So to look towards the history, read it, analyze it, study it, and derive the tools for success. So وَجَعَلْنَاهُمْ أَحَادِيث. And the surah concludes this very brief overview or summary of human history with a very strong and emphatic rejection of these communities. فَبُعْدًا لِقَوْمٍ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. So away with the people who don't believe. And the commentators mention this means destruction, punishment, lack of mercy, or being distanced from mercy for those who don't believe in Allah and His messengers. So they say this is a statement of rejection, of rebuke, reprimand, and warning for every single conscious non-believer. Alright, so again, in this short passage, in these few verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just giving a very, very brief overview, a very quick reference to multiple stories of prophets. That after the time of Hud alayhi salam, Allah sent messenger after messenger after messenger. And every time a messenger came, their community reject them, they belied them. And because of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala punished those people. Now the surah is going to briefly mention the story of Musa alayhi salam with Fir'aun. And the story is mentioned very briefly, keeping in style with the rest of the surah and its main purpose. And we're also going to notice that it shares common themes and topics with the stories mentioned before it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, ثُمَّ أَرْسَلْنَا مُوسَى وَأَخَاهُ هَارُونَ بِآيَاتِنَا وَسُلْطَانٍ مُبِينٍ إِلَى فِرْعَوْنَ وَمَلَئِهِ فَاسْتَكْبَرُوا وَكَانُوا قَوْمًا عَالِينَ. Then we sent Musa and his brother Harun with our signs, and a manifest authority to Fir'aun and his notables. But they waxed arrogant and were a haughty people. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that He sent Musa alayhi salam and his brother Harun as messengers to Fir'aun and his notables. And we covered earlier that the word mala'a, it literally means the people of authority, the people of power, the people of influence, the people of wealth and leadership. So basically Fir'aun's advisors, his ministers or cabinet, the people of wealth, power and influence in his court. And Musa and Harun alayhi salam, they were armed with the signs of Allah. Right? بِآيَاتِنَا. They were armed with the signs of Allah. And they say these are referring to the 9 specific signs or the 9 specific miracles that Musa alayhi salam was given to prove that he was a prophet sent by Allah and that indeed he was telling the truth. So all of us know that Musa alayhi salam, he was given a certain number of miracles. The most famous being his asa, his staff. That he had a staff that when he threw it on the ground, it would become a serpent. And when he picked it back up, it would become a staff again. And the other famous miracle he was given, that his hand would shine like a light. That when he would press his hand to his side and take it out, it would shine like a light. And when he put it back in, the light would go away. So these are the 2 most famous miracles that were given to him. These are known as ayat. These were proofs that he's telling the truth, that he is a messenger sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The other 9 signs were the years of famine. The sea, the flood, the locusts, lice and frogs and blood. All these different unique punishments that were given to Fir'aun and his people. So after Musa alayhi salam invited Fir'aun to accept Islam, the story goes that his nation faced difficulty after difficulty after difficulty. So these hardships, this famine, the swarm of locusts and the swarm of lice, all of these things were also signs that Musa alayhi salam was telling the truth. And these 9 signs are mentioned in Surah Al-A'raf, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, فَأَرْسَلْنَا عَلَيْهِمُ الطُّوفَانَ وَالْجَرَادَ وَالْقُمَّلَ وَالضَّفَادِعَ وَالدَّمَ آيَاتٍ مُفَصَّلَاتٍ فَاسْتَكْبَرُوا وَكَانُوا قَوْمًا مُجْرِمِينَ. So we sent upon them the flood and locusts and lice and frogs and blood as distinct signs, but they were arrogant and were a criminal people. And they were also armed with manifest authority. وَسُلْطَانٍ مُبِينٍ, which is referring to the undeniable, absolute, clear, and unequivocal proofs and arguments. So Musa and Harun were calling towards something that couldn't be challenged or questioned in any way, shape, or form. However, just like the previous nations, the people of Fir'aun and himself, they were arrogant, they were haughty, and they were full of pride. And their pride and arrogance made them stubborn, and it prevented them from accepting the truth. And pride and arrogance, al-kibr, they are considered to be the most destructive diseases of the heart. Pride and arrogance are considered to be the most dangerous, the most destructive, the most harmful diseases of the heart. So all of us know that the purity of our hearts plays a huge role within our religion. Right? The role of the heart is extremely important. And there are certain spiritual diseases that we're supposed to protect ourselves from. And one of the main ones is pride and arrogance. So much so that the Prophet ﷺ told us that whoever has an atom's weight of pride in their heart will not enter into paradise. And the reason behind that, or at least one of the reasons behind the danger of pride, is because pride leads a person towards denying the truth. That when a person is arrogant, when they have a lot of pride in their hearts, it prevents them from accepting the truth, it prevents them from humbling themselves in front of the truth. And in addition to being arrogant, Fir'aun and his notables were also very wealthy and powerful. So they were an advanced nation which also fed their ego, and they were a haughty people. وَقَوْمُهُمَا لَنَا وَكَانُوا قَوْمًا عَالِينَ. And they were an arrogant people. So instead of accepting the truth, they rejected Musa and Harun, and they chose to disbelieve. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, فَقَالُوا أَنُؤْمِنُ لِبَشَرَيْنِ مِثْلِنَا وَقَوْمُهُمَا لَنَا عَابِدُونَ. They said, shall we believe in two human beings just like us, while their people are slaves that we possess? So this is the exact same objection that's being repeated by Fir'aun and his notables that was posed by the people of Nuh, Hud, Salih, and all the other prophets and messengers. That we see the same objection that the messengers are human beings just like us. So why should we believe them? Why should we believe that they are prophets? So Fir'aun and his mala and his notables, they said, how can we believe and follow two human beings who are just like us? They eat, they drink, sleep, breathe, and shop just like us. There's nothing special about them, so why should we believe that they are messengers? Why should we accept their call? And on top of that, their people, the children of Israel, they are our slaves and servants, they follow us, so why in the world should we follow them? So again, we see that their arrogance and their pride is getting the better of them. It's blinding them from accepting the truth. And they say that we also see the effects of materialism on their thoughts and ideas. They saw the world through the perspective of material means, wealth, power, and authority, so it prevented them from seeing this spiritual reality and the truth of the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they say this is the exact same thing the Prophet ﷺ faced from the leadership of Quraysh. The same objection was raised to the Prophet ﷺ by the notables or the leadership of Quraysh. They objected to his claim and ultimately rejected him because of their pride, arrogance, and materialistic understanding of this world. And again, this is history repeating itself. Every single prophet faced the same objection. And we face the same objection till this day. Right? Till today, believers, regardless of what faith they're following, are facing the exact same objections. That how is it possible that a God exists? How is it possible that God speaks to a human being? How is it possible that God could send down revelation? And all of these questions and objections are repeated throughout history. So dealing with these difficulties and dealing with these challenges, it's not something new. It's something that every single prophet and messenger had to deal with as well. So Fir'aun and his people, they rejected him. فَكَذَّبُوهُمَا فَكَانُوا مِنَ الْمُهْلَكِينَ. So they denied them, so they were amongst the destroyed. So Fir'aun and his notables rejected Musa and Harun alayhimus salam and refused to believe in their message of the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they were destroyed by being drowned in the Red Sea, just as the nations before them were destroyed because of their stubborn disbelief. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then tells us, وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا مُوسَى الْكِتَابَ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَهْتَدُونَ. And indeed we gave Musa the book that so that they may be guided. So Musa alayhi salam was given the Torah after Fir'aun and his followers were destroyed. So according to the story of Musa alayhi salam, the Torah was revealed to him after his people escaped from Egypt. So after he led the children of Israel from Egypt and they crossed the Red Sea and Fir'aun and his army were drowned, that's when Musa alayhi salam was given revelation. That's when he was given the Torah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the Torah to Musa, as a book of guidance for the children of Israel. It contained rulings, commands, and prohibitions, just like the Quran. So the function of the Torah for Bani Israel was very similar to the function of the Quran for us as Muslims. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually tells us this in Surah Al-Qasas, that وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَا مُوسَى الْكِتَابَ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا أَهْلَكْنَا الْقُرُونَ الْأُولَى بَصَائِرَ لِلنَّاسِ وَهُدًى وَرَحْمَةً لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَذَكَّرُونَ. And we gave Musa the scripture, we gave him the Torah, after we had destroyed the former generations, as enlightenment for the people and guidance and mercy that they might be reminded. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He describes the Torah with three adjectives, right? With three adjectives. That it's basa'ira lin-nas, it's enlightenment for people. So this is a very similar description that's given for the Quran. That the Quran is mubin, the Quran is clear, it clarifies truths, it clarifies reality. The Quran is also a guidance, it's also a hidayah, it's huda. And the Quran is also a rahmah, it's also a mercy. So the Torah for the children of Israel, it served a very similar function, a very similar purpose as the Quran serves for us. And then Allah mentions why He revealed the Torah to them, that they might be guided. لَعَلَّهُمْ يَهْتَدُونَ. And after Allah revealed the Torah, no nation was destroyed as a whole, rather the believers were commanded to strive and struggle against them. And this is something we talked about last week, that we see throughout history Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He destroyed nations completely. So the entire nation of Ad was destroyed, the entire nation of Thamud, the entire nation of Lut alayhi salam. But after the time of Musa alayhi salam, no nation was destroyed as a whole. Rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would send simple punishments, some natural disasters, but He does not wipe another nation off the face of this earth. Rather, we as believers are commanded to strive and struggle against them. Now next, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala very, very briefly mentions the story of Isa alayhi salam and his mother, Maryam alayhi salam, highlighting his miraculous birth. And this story has been mentioned earlier in the Quran in greater detail, both in Surah Ali Imran and Surah Maryam. And it's mentioned briefly here to convey the same message as the previous stories, to show the great power of Allah upon whatever He wills. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam alayhi salam without a father or a mother. And He created Hawa, his wife, from a male without a female. And He created Isa alayhi salam from a female without a male. And He created the rest of humanity through both males and females. So this is being shown to show the greatness, the power, the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That He does as He wills, He does as He pleases. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, وَجَعَلْنَا ابْنَ مَرْيَمَ وَأُمَّهُ آيَةً وَآوَيْنَاهُمَا إِلَى رَبْوَةٍ ذَاتِ قَرَارٍ وَمَعِينٍ. That, and we made the son of Mary and his mother a sign, and we gave them refuge in a high place of stillness and a flowing spring. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that He made Isa alayhi salam and his mother Maryam a sign, an ayah, a proof upon the ultimate divine power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the sign, the ayah that's being referred to, is the miraculous birth of Isa alayhi salam without a father. Then they were given refuge in a high place, a rabwa. And a rabwa, again, it's a high place, a hill, and here it's referring to the land of Baytul Maqdis. So it's referring specifically to this sacred land, the land of Baytul Maqdis, which is in Palestine. And dhati qarar, it's translated here as stillness, but it's referring to a place that is conducive for life. So a place that has plentiful fruit, vegetables, and food. So this high place was a place that had plentiful vegetation and a flowing spring, a place where life was comfortable. Alright, so again over here Allah is just very, very briefly touching upon the story of Isa alayhi salam. He only mentions this one verse and doesn't mention anything else. So it's in keeping with the style of the surah. So if you'll notice that since the surah, it started mentioning a series of stories. It started with the story of Nuh alayhi salam, then Hud alayhi salam, then all these other prophets, then Musa, and then Isa alayhi salam. And all of these stories are mentioned very, very briefly. So the surah has discussed a set of 5 total stories so far. The story of Nuh, the story of Hud, the story of Salih, Lut, Shu'aib and others as one, the story of Musa and Harun, and now the story of Isa alayhi salam. And all of these stories were mentioned very briefly, not much detail was provided. And the reason why a great amount of detail was not provided is so that we as readers or listeners can pay attention to the main points or lessons from each of these incidents. So again, this is part of the style of the Quran. That when we look through the Quran, we find that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never gives the entire details of a single story. Very rarely are we going to find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioning a story from beginning to end with every single piece of detail. Rather, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just makes brief references. And they say one of the objectives behind that is so that we don't focus on unnecessary things. So we're not focused on names, we're not focused on places, we're not focused on what people were eating or what they were drinking or what they were doing. Rather, we're focusing on what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants us to focus on. That what is the main lesson, what is the main moral, what is the reminder that we can derive from these stories. So all these stories that have been mentioned so far, they share a common core purpose and common core themes. The first is reminders of the ultimate and divine might and power of Allah. Every single story reminds us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Aziz, that He is the Almighty, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be overcome, rather He is the one who overcomes. That whenever a nation disbelieves, whenever a nation goes against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself deals with them. And we see this throughout history, that all of these arrogant, prideful, non-believing, disbelieving nations that rejected their prophets and rejected their messengers and were unjust and oppressive, all of them were destroyed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Starting with the people of Nuh alayhi salam, then the people of Aad, the people of Thamud, the people of Lut alayhi salam, Fir'aun and his army, all of them were completely wiped off the face of this earth. And that's a manifestation of the absolute might, the absolute power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is a very significant thing. Recognizing that Allah is the Almighty, the All-Powerful. That He is Al-Aziz and He is Al-Qadir. He has the ability and power over every single thing. The second main core is the reality of prophethood. That prophethood is a station that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created, and He chose men throughout history to serve as prophets and messengers. And that their primary responsibility was twofold. The primary responsibility of every prophet and messenger was two things: to warn and to give glad tidings. So their message was the same. Every single prophet and messenger came with the exact same message: worship Allah alone without any partners. And we see that throughout all 5 of these stories. They're saying the exact same thing. And then they're giving bashara, they're giving glad tidings to the people who believe. That hey, if you accept this message, you have achieved eternal salvation, you get paradise. But if you reject this message, if you oppose this message, then you're leading yourself towards eternal damnation. You're leading yourselves towards eternal punishment. And part of the reality of prophethood is that whenever someone stands up for the truth, they will face opposition. This is just like a reality of life. Anytime someone stands up to the truth, they're going to face opposition from someone. So they say that if a person doesn't have critics, then they're not doing the right thing. Right? If a person does not have critics, then they're not doing the right thing. So if you're being opposed, if we as Muslims are being opposed, that means inshallah we are upon the truth. And we're supposed to continue to stand and struggle for the truth. The third reason why these stories are mentioned so often in the Quran is they call it tasliya. It's consolation for the Prophet ﷺ. So all of these revelations, they're all revealed in the Meccan period of prophethood, which was full of difficulties and hardships. And we've discussed this concept before, that although He's the last and final messenger, and although He's the Prophet ﷺ, at the end of the day He was also a human being. And as human beings He had emotions. So He would feel it when His own people, when His own nation rejected Him. When His own uncles would oppose Him. When His own uncle would curse Him and call Him names and ridicule Him. Where His aunt would try to physically harm Him. Where He faced His community would be persecuted and tortured and ridiculed and mocked and all of these negative things. So as consolation, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds Him that you're not alone in facing these struggles. Throughout history, the exact same thing happened. And it's also a consolation for us as well. That as believers, if we're truly following the way of the Prophet ﷺ and the way of all the prophets, we're also going to face these hardships and these difficulties, these trials, these tribulations. And we're supposed to follow their example of patience and resilience and being steadfast. And the last thing is, it's a warning. That all of these stories are warnings to the non-believers. They are stern warnings to those people who fight against the truth and who struggle against the truth and belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there are many, many lessons that can be derived from these stories. And it's important for us again to actually know these stories, know the history of our prophets, know the history of Islam. Because Islam did not start with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Where did Islam start with? Adam alayhi salam. Right? Every single prophet and messenger was sent with the exact same religion, the exact same set of core beliefs. They might have differed in the particulars, but the core message was always the same. And that core message again is the oneness of Allah and the concept of life after death. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inshallah to give us the tawfiq, the ability to read these stories, to understand these stories, to study them, to be able to derive lessons and morals from them. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the patience of the prophets. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the steadfastness of the prophets as well. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to strengthen and deepen our understanding of the Qur'an. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the ability to act upon the Qur'an and bring it into our daily lives. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from the people of the Qur'an, who are the special people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to make the Qur'an a proof for us and not a proof against us. Now, any questions? Okay, go ahead.
Question is that every prophet was equipped with some miracles.
Mm-hmm.
With our prophet, he divide the moon, and it's, even now, they go when they went on the moon, they say circle over the earth and divide it into half. Same thing about what told me about the Musa alayhi salam. He had a stick that was converted into a
Staff.
snake, or it could eat everything.
Mm-hmm.
And also he had some powers, of the hand or something like that. So when they were challenged, everybody was challenging them. Why didn't they use these miracles?
They did.
They did.
They did. So when they were being challenged, they showed them these miracles and they saw them. But because the people were so arrogant, because they had so much pride, they were stubborn. So even though they saw it with their own eyes, they still chose not to believe. So for example, Fir'aun, he saw the serpent, he saw the staff, and he saw the staff beat all the magicians. But despite that, he still chose not to believe. And the people of Quraysh, they knew the truth. Right? They used to say, يَعْرِفُونَهُ كَمَا يَعْرِفُونَ أَبْنَاءَهُم. They knew the truth as well as they knew their own children. But because they had so much pride and arrogance and stubbornness in their hearts, they refused to accept it. So it was conscious rejection. Like, we know it's true, but we're not going to accept it just because we can't bring ourselves to do so. We don't have the humility to do so.
This is for the ninth part. Today I just started the meaning. This is for the ninth part.
Which one?
We talk about that for the Musa and Jesus.
It's mentioned in the ninth juz as well. Yes. Oh, okay. Either.
One of the things about the stories is that after there's a point at which the prophets and the messengers, they reach, I guess, a saturation point.
Mm-hmm.
After that, there was not going to be any more
Hope.
movement. Can that apply to this day and age?
So
Because, especially with the advent of the explosion of the internet,
mm-hmm.
and you have so much information out there proving without a shadow of a doubt that Islam is the truth. I mean, you just have, as an example, Yusuf Estes, the priest, and there are so many priests and religious figures
Accepting
going
it.
into the fold of Islam. You never hear about imams going the other way.
Yeah.
I mean, you only hear about religious figures, and then not to mention the fact that, without going into the proofs and the evidences, name one religion where you have the people of science and the people of
Intellect
being the most devout.
Yeah.
Really, if you look at any other religious group, it's almost a foregone conclusion among the Christian community or the Jewish community that if you want to have an advanced degree, you're going to be an atheist.
Yeah.
Whereas with Islam, it's the other way around. So can we say that we've almost reached a saturation point in the world today?
So
there's going to be a little trickle of a movement here and there, but it seems to me like everybody already has enough information to make a decision.
So in terms of like the saturation point for the past communities,
Mm-hmm.
so their communities were a lot smaller, right? In terms of just population, just in terms of sheer number. So they had reached the saturation point, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself inspired them that, okay, this is it. Like however much work you were going to do, your work is done. Whereas for the Prophet ﷺ, that it's not the same circumstance, it's not the same situation. Right? Where we as an ummah are given the same responsibility of continuing to call and invite until the end of times. So even though there's so much information available, there's even more misinformation available. So although that there's the truth is out there, the vast majority of people they have not come across it. Like I would even say, like, perhaps the average American who has very little interaction with Muslims, or probably no interaction with a Muslim, the only understanding of Islam they have is something that's distorted. So the only thing they hear about Islam is perhaps on Fox News, and all they hear is that Muslims are what? They're terrorists and they're out to get you. Yeah. So they haven't actually heard the truth. And that's why they say that you just continue making that effort, continue making that push. And oftentimes if you interact with these people, it completely changes their perspective. It completely changes their mind. So I don't know. It's our responsibility to grab people and let them know what the truth is.
Another thing, I think, Allah says that they can bring other people.
Yeah.
So the new people who come in USA, they are much brighter,
Yeah.
converse.
Yeah.
Better
Pe-
understanding,
pe-
better
pe-
Muslims.
people that consciously choose Islam, they come in with a different fervor, different zeal and enthusiasm, much different. And it's interesting. Someone was making the point that in the past, you see people, they were associating partners with Allah, so they believed in this concept of a God, and they would accept other deities. Nowadays, they say like the new God is science, right? People take science as a deity, and they worship anything that's scientific. And they would say like the scientists are like the new prophets, right? It's amazing. Like you see the same themes, that just taking a different form or different shape. So
the new God is the self.
yeah, the new God is the self, right? People worship their own selves and their own desires. It's interesting, and all the issues that the prophets dealt with, they dealt with similar things, but it had a different form. And today it's taken a different form, but I guess you can say that the main points that you can drive are all the same. Right, this battle between good and evil, belief and disbelief, it's the same throughout history. The form just changes.
Sheikh, it would be fair to say that since Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam alayhi salam until today, we have been getting the same exact message with no contradiction of any sort between all of the messengers and the prophets. So what was common is things of faith-based,
Belief.
meaning Tawheed, the 6 articles of Tawheed.
Yeah,
These have never changed since Adam until today.
exactly.
The only thing that changed or might be perceived as different is the way how people practice
That religion, exactly.
religion, the way of life, right?
So they say that the aqidah is the same, the sharia is different.
Yeah.
Very simple distinction. So the core common faith has always been the same, and Islam just means submission. It's always been the same, but the way of showing that submission, it changed throughout history.
So the other thing that comes to mind, I heard the story of the Prophet ﷺ. So like you said before, that the Prophet ﷺ went through many tribulations, and then he was taken out of his own most beloved land,
Yeah,
that he grew up in. And subhanAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would reveal the stories of the Prophet as a way of strengthening the Prophet ﷺ and affirming his faith.
Yeah.
You were not alone in this. That there's so many people that have went through the same thing, and it's just like you said before, it's the human history that keeps repeating itself over
Yeah.
and over again. But what's really surprising is that subhanAllah, Fir'aun, like you said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent to him nine miracles. Not just one.
9.
He said 9, but then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took a step further, and he described to them not as miracles, but as clear miracles, meaning that there is no grey area, meaning that Pharaoh didn't have this
Doubt.
or maybe it means this. No, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says he ruled this out, But what's really even more surprising is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because when Jibreel alayhi salam, he was telling the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam these stories to relieve him,
Yeah.
He said, "O Prophet of Allah, if you were to see me at that moment when Pharaoh was drowning, and I was throwing the water into his mouth,
Mouth, yeah.
so that before the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would reach him."
So he doesn't have the chance to say.
Yeah,
Huh?
subhanAllah, which is really surprising that even someone who have done so much in his life to that point
Huh?
that you have transgressed against Allah subhanahu and you have claimed to be
Oh Lord.
the Lord himself, you know, that
Allah's-
it's possible for someone to repent.
Allah's mercy is infinite. It's
SubhanAllah.
ajib.
It's really surprising.
Yeah. Just one point you reminded me. I heard a speaker speaking. It was very profound. He's saying every single thing that happened to the Prophet ﷺ was of some significance. Even before becoming a prophet, every incident that took place was preparing him to assume that station of prophethood. So he said something profound. It's poetic, but profound. He said he lost his father before he was even what? Born. So instead of growing up saying Abi, Abi, he learned how to say Rabbi, Rabbi. Right from that age. And he's saying he lost his mother at a very young age. So instead of going up saying Ummi, Ummi, he learned how to say Ummati, Ummati. Everything that happened to him in his life was preparing him for this huge responsibility, this huge station. So every single aspect of his life, there's some lesson, there's some deep, profound thing that can be derived from it. That's why seerah is important. Seerah is important. Actually, our teachers used to say you should always have a book of seerah in rotation, constantly. You should always be reading some book of seerah, involved in some type of activity of reading and learning about the life of the Prophet.
In the institution of Risala or messengerhood, I thought like a prophet usually is sent to his own sent to his own people. Like if Musa was a Jew or from Bani Israel, he would be sent to the Israelites. But here it says that he was sent to Pharaoh, who's not from Bani Israel.
Not
right?
from Bani Israel.
So is this ever talked about that? Because usually they said the Prophet peace be upon him was sent to his own people.
His own
Every
people.
prophet was sent to their people.
Yeah.
But Musa was not from the people of Pharaoh, or he was not from the same. He's not the same peoples.
I guess in terms of community, they'd be the same people, like
They
same
said that they were the
geographic.
slaves of they were the slaves of the Pharaoh. They
In
weren't the
terms
same.
geographic location. So like he was sent to them like for that location.
So,
I thought also maybe because Musa grew up as
He grew up in his household. Yeah, that could.
he was
Yeah.
considered both.
That is actually that's actually a profound. That's a deep point. Right, Fir'aun could be considered his people because he grew up in his
Right.
in his
that's-
house.
That's the way I meant.
Yeah. Yeah.
just a comment on what I mentioned. SubhanAllah, I heard in Surah Al-Qasas, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned the story of Musa alayhi salam, is that if you look at Bani Israel at that time, Musa alayhi salam